Thank you very much, Annemarie Mol, for being here together. It's such a pleasure and an honor. It is something I've been always wanting to do. So thank you for giving me the opportunity. What I want to do in my talk is to explain how the ontologists and epistemologists developed in the field called urban political ecology, which is the field I work in, why these ontologists and epistemologists matter, and how they matter when it comes to addressing the systematic disaster we call climate change. And in part, I will draw upon a material and debates we highlight in the book, just came out, Turning Up the Heat, is with Roger Kyle, Tate Mandler, and Yannis Zaninis. Now, because this is a mixed audience, I have to say urban political ecology is a field that was developed in the 1990s with foundational texts by Harvey, Smith, Cronon, Mike Davis, Eric Swingerdow, Matthew Gandhi, Desford and Kale, Paul Robbins, Nick Heinen, and myself, amongst others. And this scholarship made an intervention to both the fields of urban studies and to the field of political ecology. For urban studies, urban political ecology, I'll refer to it as UPE because it's a very long name. So UPE disrupted what was the canon in urban studies that conceptualized cities as these bounded, purely social spaces separated from the biophysical world and some kind of hinterland. Think here of the Chicago School of Urban Sociology and this depiction of cities as this bounded social object outside the biophysical world, this kind of rigid definition. So ontologically, UP unsettled this traditional binary between cities and nature, core and hinterland, and it made two key claims. The first claim is that there is nothing unnatural about cities. Everything around us, bricks, asphalt, steel, concrete, are metabolized and engineered flows of natural resources put together through human labor, capital investment and technology, and governed by power relations. And the second claim is that equally, there is nothing natural about a park or a forest for that matter. These are also the outcomes of historical layers of metabolic flows between geological processes, biophysical processes, and human world. So UPE claimed that there is no city as such, no nature as such. There is a perpetual process which I call the urbanization of nature. And in dialogue with Haraway's and Latour's work, UP developed new ontological understandings of the city and nature as hybrids and cyborgs, socio-environmental processes ridden by power relations. Now, apart from this intervention made in urban studies, as I said, UP made an intervention to political ecology as well. And that was to urge political ecologists to focus not only on what is happening outside cities and the extractivist landscapes of the global north and the global south and the distributive politics involved in these extractivist politics, but to focus on the dialectic between what is happening in these extractivist landscapes and what is happening in the processes of urbanization, to put these two strands of research that were separate at the time to talk to each other and fuse and ferment and do things. So UP urged to examine how what Brandon Vincent called the imperial mode of living in urban centers is made possible only because we can extract labor, energy, land, minerals, food, waste sinks at a global scale. And we focus on examining how our increased growth and sustainability and smartness and resilience is inevitably someone else's socio-environmental disaster. So UP looks at climate change not as some kind of collateral damage of growth, but as the very modus operandi at the heart of capitalist urbanization. And these ontological shifts went hand in glove with 4 key epistemological interventions. The first one is, as I noted, the call to not focus on things, as city as this bounded object, but on processes and relations, to examine the urbanization of nature as a set of metabolic flows and relations, socio-environmental power relations. Now, what does this mean in practice? How does this change our research practice? It means that to understand cities, to understand urbanization, we need to look outside and underneath cities at all those dams, tunnels, reservoirs, pipelines that disrupt geological and biophysical processes to carry flows of water, energy, food, sewage, waste in and out of cities. It is these flows that make urbanization possible. They make cities tick. Yet, they remain invisible and outside the cognitive map of the urban dweller. We turn a tap on at the comfort of our own home and we get fresh, clean water that we can just drink or use. We don't problematize necessarily every time we turn the tap on what are all these networks, capital investment, technology, labor, resource extraction that go into daily, hourly into making this simple act in our comfortable homes performative to deliver water. So the first task that UP called is to make those invisible flows visible. But that's not enough. And the second task, the second intervention, is the urge to examine those flows, those metabolic flows, not only per se, not only in themselves, but also as as part of a violent process of creative destruction, as part of a series of conflicts and power relations that are involved in producing these flows and in maintaining these flows. Now, there are other flow-based approaches that examine the urban. There were before UP, notably industrial ecology. But what these approaches is, we're quantifying these flows. There's so much energy going in the city, so much going out, so much waste going out, so much pollution going out, so much food going in, etc. So UP argues that this is important, but it's not sufficient. We need to expand our analysis to a qualitative analysis of a dual metabolic circuit. On one hand, of cycles of economic investment and disinvestment, growth and crisis, and on the other hand, of cycles of socio-ecological transformation and destruction. And it is this dialectic relation between these two circuits that lies at the heart of urbanization and ultimately drives climate change. For example, how does this work in practice? Think of the fire disasters that burn entire settlements every year from Hawaii to Greenland and from Australia to Greece. These are new fire ecologies and are the direct product of profit-driven, expansive urbanization practices. These practices override local ecologies. They wipe out entire Holocene adaptations and push native ecosystems beyond their survival tipping point. And this almost invariably happens with public blessings and even subsidies. So we need to understand this dual metabolic circuit of real estate speculation, socio-ecological transformation, in order to understand and start tackling these fire ecologies. The third intervention UP made is the persistence that it is not enough to make these flows visible. It is not enough to make a qualitative analysis of how these flows are implicated in this dual metabolic circuit. We also need to historicize this dual metabolic circuit, to embed it within a deeper history of global socio-ecological exchanges. What does this matter, again, for research practice? Take, for example, Amsterdam's housing crisis. When I examine Amsterdam housing under a UPE framework, I want to explain not only how and why each multi-million transaction over a canal house exacerbates social crisis and inequality. I also want to know how each one of these transactions exacerbates global environmental crisis as well. And to do this, I need to expand my methods beyond real estate aggregate data and institutional frameworks or even household practices. So to do this, I examine Amsterdam's canal houses as sponges that have absorbed century upon century and layer upon layer the profit that had been extracted from exploiting natural resources and bodies of men and women not only locally, but also in Suriname, Ghana, India, Angola, Senegal, South Africa, Indonesia. In ports, mines, oil rigs, breweries, cigarette and biscuit factories, windmills, tulip plantations. All this exploitation and sweat ended up becoming piles of bricks along the canals of Amsterdam, or at least a big chunk of that exploitation and sweat. And this is not something that just happened in the past and ended there. Each time a new real estate transaction takes place in Amsterdam, fresh amounts of profit extracted from new labor and resource exploitation across the world will sink once again into this particular pile of bricks we call the Amsterdam Canal House. And a fourth intervention that UP made, it is not unique for UP, but UP insists on practicing a kind of scholarship that is not simply an insular academic exercise, but is also a means of exploring alternative pathways to urbanization. This means always putting forward as key question who wins and who loses out of any socio-environmental intervention. Now today, UP spans more than 3 decades of cross-fertilization with other disciplines, but also internal debate and self-criticism. But also today, I believe UP's ontological and epistemological interventions are more important than ever before, because the dynamics of growth produce new forms of urbanization, corridor urbanization, extensive suburbanization, office cities, aerotropolises, infrastructure zones, logistic cities. And these are new urbanization processes and practices that further expand extractivism, but they also further disrupt the ontological understandings of cities as this bounded object. They create new layered dynamics of growth and decline, densification and de-densification, and they promote new forms of inequality and marginality and environmental hazard. So in this book, we highlight 4 key debates in contemporary UP that can help us better understand these processes and address them. First, we focus on extended urbanization as a concept that can help us better capture these dynamics of growth and urbanization. It's a concept that can push us to theorize urbanization practices not only from the core outside, but also from its margins. It helps us to move beyond the ontological supremacy of the core, and this can also help us expand our understanding of marginality beyond the traditional notions, actors, and spaces. Again, why does this matter for our research practice? Here's an example of why it matters. When back in 2015, Berger depicted the US suburban fringe as no man's land, this was not simply an academic exercise or an academic representation. It mattered politically because accepting US suburbia as no man's land means A, ignoring millennia of metabolic flows between humans and the biophysical world that produce these landscapes. 2, it means ignoring generations of power struggles over this land between indigenous and settlers. 3, it means neglecting the history of power dynamics between state planning and private property regimes that normalized land grabbing on these same landscapes. So there is no such thing as no man's land. This is UP's epistemological position. And this position is linked to a much broader debate, not only in UP, that we also highlight in the book. It's a call for a situated urban political ecology, coming from scholars, mainly from scholars working on and from the global south, a call for a broader range of experiences and practices to inform theory, and a call to decenter the very position from which we speak, from which theory is being produced. For example, Roberto Luis Montemor and Esther Limonade research in Brazil spaces that have been perceived as no man's land for a very long time. And they find that these spaces today not only produce alternative thriving economies and social relations, but they also and relations with the biophysical world, but they also have the potential to offer alternative socio-environmental imaginaries for the core itself. The third debate that we highlight in the book as important for the dynamics of climate change is the call to better embed the more than human life world into urban research agenda and practice. Again, this is not unique to UPE, but UPE scholars were amongst the first to bring the non-human matter into our analysis of the urban and processes of urbanization. We focused on water, air, food, rare earth materials, and how these processes and these metabolic flows interact with processes of urbanization. But today, we need to expand these practices further, given that the relationship between urbanization and the biophysical world becomes even more complex, more dynamic, and with more important, if you wish, political implications. We need to engage the natural sciences, ecologists, engineers, medics into this debate. For example, Roger, Kyle, Ali, and Teffers add infectious disease and zoonosis into the analysis of metabolic explanations of urbanization. They examine the SARS, the Ebola, and the COVID outbreaks and argue that a spatialized political ecology of infectious disease can help us mitigate the impact of outbreaks in a continuously urbanizing world. And the fourth debate, the final debate that the book highlights as relevant to the politics of climate change, has to do with a very important political conundrum. While we, as scholars, move beyond privileging cities as objects of inquiry, policymakers are turning the city into the preferred site for policy intervention. Cities are now expected to save the planet. International organizations fund and promote circular cities, smart cities, digital cities as urban risk management practices. So the city has become the preferred site for intervention. And these technocratic solutions often can lead to what Swingedau calls a depoliticization of socio-environmental issues, as socio-environmental issues become technical, managerial problems. So how smart can we be? Oh, if we can be smarter, then we can be more environmentally friendly. So this can lead to depoliticizing the whole environmental question. But these techno-managerial practices, precisely because often they are very top-down and kind of implemented by large organizations and institutions, they can also generate new forms of politics. And Irina Velicu, for example, discusses how in Romania, the top-down policy to turn the whole country into a fully urbanized, industrialized land which can absorb foreign capital investment. This top-down policy became instrumental for land grabbing and for dispossessing the country's very large peasant population. They suddenly became irrelevant to this vision for an urbanized, industrialized country. But this same practice also generated the political consciousness as more and more people proclaimed themselves as the new peasants, and they formed the eco-ruralis movement, which successfully challenged land grabbing and successfully challenged this fully urbanized, industrialized vision for the country. So, how do we go forward? How can these ontologies, epistemologies that UP advocates, extended urbanization, situated urban ecologies, more than human urban ecologies, how can they, if at all, help us move urban environmental research and practice forward? At the moment, we have developed a large toolkit of methods to take research practice forward. What we don't have is a coherent alternative programmatic or planning agenda to take us beyond the existing apocalyptic scenarios or technocratic solutions. But what we do have is on-the-ground alternative practices and imaginaries, and UP systematically documents these. Most of these are localized. Many take their cue from Latin American bon vivir practices. Many directly question growth altogether. The problem is that when it comes to turning these small-scale localized practices into broader programmatic agendas, we are at a complete stalemate. And this stalemate does not come from the evil doings of power or capitalism or anyone else. This stalemate comes from a disagreement right at the heart of progressive academia and politics. And it's a disagreement between should we pull the brakes on growth altogether and focus on saving the planet, which is what degrowth advocates, or should we maintain a level of growth that can save jobs and improve livelihoods, which is what socialist modernizers argue. I want to argue that this actually is a false dilemma, and one that we urgently need to debunk in order to go beyond and prefigure a new kind of politics, if we can. And the first suggestion I want to make in the direction of debunking this false dilemma is to take seriously Matthew Hubert's depiction of climate change as class war, and try to link again in our research practice, in our epistemologists, in our ontologists, but also in the very empirical work we do, to link again questions of labor, of production and reproduction with questions, with environmental questions. Try to link again, if possible, to make the labor movement talk again to the environmental movement. They started hand in glove, and towards the 80s, they diverged to the point that today they're antithetical. We have laborers arguing against transitions of energy because they're afraid of losing their jobs. It's a big discussion. I don't want to go too much into it, but I think engaging with these very urgent questions as researchers is very important, bringing them into our research agenda. So we need to systematically research work, productive and reproductive labor, as a gendered and racialized mediator of these socio-environmental metabolic flows, as Stefania Barca suggests. Why is this important? Because if we accept that the expansion of growth and inequality is enacted through unequal global metabolic exchanges, these are not only unequal exchanges of matter, of nutrients, of water, of sun and energy embodied in the products we consume and the food we eat. These are also unequal global exchanges of labor, of human and animal labor, which are also embodied and transformed and transposed and imported and consumed in the food we eat and the goods we buy, from beans and berries to cars and phones and construction materials. So these unequal transfers of labor need to be calculated at the heart of the global solidary exchanges we may want to achieve. And in order to move beyond this, what I call false dilemma of saving the planet versus increasing human well-being, a second suggestion is to focus precisely on the production side of things, not on the consumption side of things. Because all current operational solutions offered against climate change are not real alternatives. The circular economy, the smart cities are consumption-level management solutions. So if we focus on the production and reproduction side of things, we can start asking, what would a use-value society look like? What does a solidary economy that destroys the things that destroy the planet do? Holgersson and Wallenius call for destroying the infrastructures of fossil capital, of coal plants and oil platforms. And this is important, and it's hard work, and it's almost impossible within a fossil economy. But even if we could do this, it's not enough. We should start seriously examining the infrastructures of financial capital, which vampire-like feed on livelihoods and environments across the globe. It is financial funds that drive tar sand oil extraction only for speculative purposes. It is mortgage funds that draw millions of livelihoods into real estate speculative practices, making us all collectively invest in making housing unaffordable for future generations. The investment funds speculating over the colonization of space already make the carbon footprint of our communications 30 times higher. So these hegemonic practices of financial capital are deeply inscribed into spatial practices. So to go beyond these, if we really want to counteract these, we need to create counter-hegemonic spatial imaginaries and practices that can accommodate a use-value economy. And this is the third suggestion I want to make. It is imperative for us academics to start systematically reimagining and prefiguring new spatial forms that can host use-value economy if we want one. Focusing on spatial change, on spatial practices, and changing spatial practices has always been at the heart of any social economic reform. Remember, the 19th century workers' upheavals were demanding demolition. They were demanding demolition of factories, of tearing up of slums, of all those infrastructures that they considered to be responsible for what was wrong with their livelihoods. So we need to start thinking new spatial imaginaries to accommodate a different kind of economy and society if we want one. And these do not have to be about demolition. They can be about a repair and replace urbanity, a solidary urbanity of use value for what Sieverts calls the in-between city. And this is not some kind of utopian call. It is already happening. And I'll give you a few examples of what infrastructure activism does with unbuilt building blocks in cities, dilapidated infrastructures on these in-between spaces. This is what the Crater collective in Ljubljana did with a brownfield site in the city center. They turned it into a living and encountering space for humans and the biophysical world. This is what the multi-species urbanism Bivazo project does here in Amsterdam. This project, led by Deborah Solomon, who is an artist, and Urbania Hove. Deborah is an artist and AISSR PhD candidate. She works with me and Caroline Nevehan. So together with the city council, local residents, Deborah transformed the monocultural splashes of green that you see here on the left between concrete blocks into use value spaces that you see on the right. This is in the Belmere area. These spaces on the right are spaces that produce food for people, plants, birds, and insects, spaces that create new relations between humans and the biophysical world. For Sieverts, these fractal urban landscapes, these in-between spaces, can help sustain life on the planet without increasing, putting some kind of stop to growth. Another example of what infrastructure activism can do is the new life offered to dilapidated urban infrastructures by the millions of refugees who are currently trapped for years in the European South. As you probably know, since the 2016 EU directive, all the flows of refugees into EU are stuck in the periphery of the EU. They have no ways of moving forward. So in the project we did with Haralabos Tsavdaroglu, we documented in Istanbul, Belgrade, and Athens how abandoned hotels, train barracks, and whole apartment blocks received attention and repair and regained new life when refugee communities moved out of the camps and occupied them. Nobody was interested in these spaces because the rent gap was not high enough for commercial development. They could not produce exchange value. But refugees produced here a brilliant use value urbanity. However, already 2-3 years after our project finished, all these use value spaces that you saw in the previous pictures are already evicted or demolished. Here is the train barracks housing a refugee communing in Belgrade, all turn up in the name of this new massive development funded by international financial capital. So once the rent gap was sufficiently high, new speculative urban renewal cycles kicked in. So what if we focused, put a lot of energy, research energy, but also political activist energy into protecting, scaling up and institutionalizing these forms of repair and use value urbanity? And this brings me to the final point I want to make. That if we are interested, I'm interested, all or most UPE scholars are interested into prefiguring a use value economy, prefiguring alternatives, rather than simply being critical of what is happening. That's important too, but not enough. So if we are interested in doing this, We, as social scientists, cannot do it alone. We need to engage not only with communities and the biophysical world, but we also need to engage with scientists, ecologists, geologists, engineers, architects, biologists, and medics. Anyone, and I know there's at least one person in this room who has done that, know how difficult it is to find a common language and to start doing it. But we need to stay with this trouble. And this staying with the trouble means not only being critical of technocratic solutions, it means also not only being innovative with our ontologies and epistemologies, it also means start prefiguring, reimagining these spatial practices, these new spatial outlets for use value, solidary economy that we presumably want. This, in my view, is the most urgent task for social scientists at this moment, to go beyond navel gazing and remain relevant to the politics of growth and urbanization for a heating planet. Thank you.
Well, Maria said it all. There's nothing I can add to that. But my talk is of a very different nature. I'm not going to try to say it all. I'm going to go into specificities of how to relate to materialities in social science research. And maybe actually just zooming in on your point number 4, which was about how to collaborate with that we, presuming we are social scientists, might collaborate with with natural scientists. And you said it was difficult, and let's open that up. Good. As Justus already said in the beginning, there has been a kind of profound division of labor between the sciences, and this got established in the 19th century with the idea that the sciences would study reality as a sort of pyramid of entities, with small and simple entities beneath and ever more complex entities above. You've had this in your sociology class about Comte, who was one of the figures who articulated this. Then physics would be the lowest layer of the pyramid, chemistry on top of that, biology, psychology, and sociology on top. And we can include something like anthropology with sociology. Sociology was the social sciences. Geography has always been difficult because we come to that. It has eluded this type of layering in which you could separate out entities in layers. Now, one of the problems for social scientists with this kind of division of labor was that it went together with the idea that what scientists do is explain, not obvious, and what explanation is telling how the more complex emerges from the simple. So in a pyramid like this means that chemistry could be explained ideally through pointing back to the laws of physics. Biology could be explained by showing the biochemistry underneath it. And the most moot point for the social scientist, biology could each time come in and explain social relations. Now, this is what in the 20th century, the social sciences have turned against. And I indicated this with, my images, by the way, are evocative, not representative. But I try to evoke here this complex relation between the potential reductionism of social realities by biology, this whole idea that the family and its sort of hetero relations and what a woman is and what a man is, what a child is, what an adult is, that all could be explained through genetics. Now, what did the social sciences do? They pushed back biology. They said, okay, maybe you can talk about nature, we talk about culture. That was already early in the 20th century. Or you can talk about blood ties, we talk about kinship. This is what the anthropologists started to do. You can talk about sex, we talk about gender. This is what the psychologist working with patients did in the 1960s and what the feminists, or 1950s actually already, and what the feminists took up in the 60s and 70s. Or in medical sociology, okay, medics talk about disease, we talk about illness, and illness was then coined as living with a disease. And then how you live with a disease would not be explained just by the illness. Let's say if you live on the first floor, a problematic leg is very different than if you live 4 steps up, etc. and so on. So that was the great invention of the 20th century of the social sciences, that they made this rupture so that they owned their own object and could not be taken, how to say this, behind their back. Their objects could no longer be explained by biology. But if we enter the 20th, of course this happened earlier, but to do my 19th, 20th, 21st century, let me do the claim that in the 21st century, it's really no longer denying that the kind of problems society faces, that for those, the physical or the material and the social are intertwined. And you cannot understand one without the other. Public health problems and ecological conundrums can hardly be talked about separating them out. I can always do a COVID example. A pandemic is not just a virus. It's endless ways of dealing with it. And all kind of ecological conundrums. I have said that fish, for you to evoke those. The pandemic is, of course, evoked by washing the hands. And as you will know, by washing your hands, you kill the fish, etc. Because, no, not very directly, but the soap is problematic for the fish. These kind of complex realities we have to somehow attend to and open up. Now, there are 2 ways of doing that. And one is, there are, of course, many ways of doing it. I divide 2 ways of doing that. And one is to go the holist way and to say we have to add all kind of knowledges up. We have to collaborate, as we were just advised, sorry to focus on the point where we disagree, Maria. We have to add up physics, chemistry, work together in a sort of putting the knowledges together and know it all. But there's also another way to go. You get my rhetorics. First you do one, and then you do the other, which is to put the pyramid on its side and to no longer study entities and no longer think that we, the social sciences, do the top of the pyramid, but that somehow these entities or situations have to be explained, but to follow practices, to follow events, to follow situations, to follow things that happen through time. This is also really a way of shifting from a sort of structural idea of what reality is to an event, really a historical idea of reality. Of course, reality is all these things. I'm not doing ontological claims. I'm playing with different ontologies. Okay, but once we study practices, interestingly, knowledge and techniques are part of the practices that we live with. I talked to you through a technique here. The way we are set up here is a 19th century classroom technique that gives me the power to speak, etc. You know your Foucault. Okay, so knowledge and techniques are part of practices and help to co-structure them. Now, what does this mean for our relation to the natural sciences? No longer is the thing of pushing them back so salient, but neither might it be so wise to add them in and to import them. Instead, what becomes interesting is to attend to the way the natural scientists help to orchestrate and order realities. So don't look at natural sciences as a reservoir of facts, but see them as a collection of techniques, as a way of dealing with the world. Doing knowledge, whether it is making or applying or teaching or whatever, is itself a socio-material practice. And I exemplify this by images this time of two ways of doing anatomy. Anatomy is the branch of biology, biomedicine, that draws lines, outlines the structural and spatial characteristics of the body, and you can see it in its the guise it had in the Rembrandt painting, where anatomy was done by how shall we call these gentlemen? Anyway, by gentlemen looking at a corpse or a dead body, and here's anatomy in a more recent guise where a person is put into an MRI scan. I mean, this is anatomy. So anatomy is not the drawing that you see in the anatomy book. It's also that, but it's also this. So if you think of a science, you wonder what the equivalent images would be of the specific branch, sub-branch of the science you're looking at. Now, what I'll do is give you 3 little examples of what that then turns out, of how that makes a difference for us to look at science in the sciences in one way or the other. They're very simple examples. The point is not the examples, the point is how I work with them. Example 1. Overweight, itself a problematic word. It's a word that is put out there as, how to say that? If I use a word in my approach, it's not my word. It is a word that is part of social practices, if you see what I mean. So the words are always already objects of a social science that takes in materialities. Not of all social science, but of the kind of way of how I would approach it. Now, there is a fact that circulates, and that says people who eat more than 2,000 kilocalories a day will gain weight. So that comes with a particular type of practice of counting. What you do with food is you measure kilocalories in the food, and then you start counting them. Now, this fact was made in a laboratory situation, and it was made under conditions where people were not given enough to eat, or not. Actually, these were, we can endlessly open details here, huh? These were American men who didn't want to go into the Second World War and who were nicely experimented with. So they were made to work, and then the laboratory technicians would feed them, and they would feed them no more than 2,000 kilocalories a day. Actually, they had, of course, some got 1,500, some got a bit more. And that is the type of research that this fact depends on. Now, this fact also circulates in an app, and it circulates as advice to people who want to lose weight. And they're being told, eat no more than 2,000 kilocalories a day. That's a fact. But it's not a fact, it's a practice. If you ask me to eat no more than 2,000 kilocalories a day, you also tell me that I should relate to my food as something that I eat, rather than eat with other people, that I should eat it as calories and not as tasty or fresh or whatever else, and that I should count. And I mean, this little example comes out of research that we did, and we got all kinds of people who, how to say this, dietitians and other people who work with people who have overweight, who claimed one of the problems that you get is if you tell people to eat no more than 2,000 kilocalories a day, is that they relate to their food through counting. That is a particular type of social practice that blocks you from feeling satisfaction. So it can be, not for everybody, but it can be counterproductive. So the point is not that this fact is not true, it's true. Let's believe this, let's believe the research. But it comes with a particular practice that can be problematic. So the social science advice or the social science technique here is not to either import the fact or to discard the fact, but to try to see what practice it helps to generate, what practice it emerges from, and what practice it helps to generate. Example 2. Very different example. It's about clean and dirty water. Now, we're currently doing, sort of a small team and myself, we're doing research with engineers who have the task of cleaning wastewater. And it's an interesting position to be in, because they have all kind of power to change the economy and whatever. They don't have that. They don't even have the power to stop the next factory of dirtying the water. So they share our ecological concerns. It's nice to work with them. We have shared concerns. There's lots of dirty water, and that is, let's say, to go very short and schematic, that's bad for the fish, for the plants, for the insects. It's ecologically bad. Now, one of the things that happens then, and now we import here ways in which this is currently tackled or dealt with, is that on a European level, there are all kinds of ideas of regulating water, and either obligations to clean or forbidding people to, or forbidding factories to put more dirt in the water, etc., and so on. These European regulations are the only way this ever is going to change a bit, because cleaning is costly. You can imagine without policy, cleaning the water will never happen. The very technical question then is, one of the many technical questions, there are loads of technical questions, but a lot of things happen in the technical question. So let me show you one technical question, is how do you even assess how dirty the water is? Now, this is not us being critical, this is what we learned from the engineers. They have this problem, which is that most current, it is to do chemical measurements. So you can measure all kinds of things. You can imagine, you can measure the pH and the temperature and the dissolved oxygen, but you can also measure phosphate and nitrate, which are both highly problematic. Phosphate and nitrate, there are lots of them in the water, and you get algae overflow from them, which kills the fish, etc., and so on. So this is really relevant to measure that. But what you do if you measure, and one of the big advantages of doing that kind of measurement, especially if you want to do European policy, you can do the same measurement in the Netherlands as in Italy and in Bulgaria, wherever. You can just make a rule that in all the waters, the phosphate from now on should be no higher than Z. I mean, I'm not doing the numbers right now. So that sounds great, because that allows for regulation. The problem with chemical measurements, however, is that you isolate all the chemicals, and that's not what the fish do. The fish and the plants, they get all these chemicals together. So what you really want to know, what you're interested in and what the whole thing is for ecological health, let's call it health. So for good ecology. Now, okay, there's another way of measuring that, which is then you don't measure all the chemicals one by one. You measure how the cocktail of chemicals in a certain bit of water, how that affects life forms. And then ideally you want to do the local life forms. So that's already different in the north of the Netherlands than in the south, in the west or the east, let alone in the Netherlands and in Italy. So it's what you really want to know, how bad is our water for our local ecology. But if you, and you could measure that if you just had to care for your own corner as an engineer, but it's very difficult to do on a level, on a European level and for European regulation, let alone for, if you say, we only want to have clothing from Bangladesh if the water keeps clean. Well, how do you assess what the water is clean there? Right now it's dirty, so that's easy to see, but these kind of regulations go very well together. So the regulation logic goes much better together with the chemical logic than with bioassays, which are local. And then, of course, the engineers are trying all kinds of ways of accommodating and dealing with this, etc., and so on. But what I want to bring out is really this point that just drawing on natural science is not drawing on natural science. Drawing on chemistry is very different than drawing on biology. And it will lead to different solutions, but also already to different ways of telling what the problem is. I like this example, it's very Amsterdamish. both these photos are from Amsterdam. In Amsterdam, there are hardly any ashtrays in public space. This is a previous project we did on clean in city of Amsterdam, where this comes from. And so it struck us that there are hardly any public ashtrays, and we talked to the public health people. They don't want ashtrays in Amsterdam because, I mean, this is sort of, smoking is bad for one's health. Yes, smoking is bad, it's a fact, smoking is bad for health. And then they say, but if you have ashtrays, this is sort of a collaboration between the public health fact that smoking is bad for health and the behavior type of knowledge that they then import from psychology. If you have ashtrays, you send the message that really smoking is okay. So we've thought a long time of how we could counter that, because it's true. So our counter argument now is that if you have no ashtrays, you send the message that throwing butts on the ground is okay, because there's massive amounts of butt on the ground. So there again, you see, the point here is not truth or not truth. It's different ways of orchestrating and different ways of arranging materialities. And the materialities are important. By the way, both the ashtrays and the cigarette butts are an absolutely fascinating, if anybody here still needs a topic, cigarette butts. No, they're fascinating. Come talk to me if you want to do cigarette butts. They sort of condense the whole world. Everything is in cigarette butts. There's lots of poison in cigarette butts too, but also, anyway, let me not start on cigarette butts. Good. So to come back again, what I contrast here is holism and differentiation. Actually, the funny thing is that drawing is made by Tate Mandler, who's one of the co-authors of Maria's book. So you see, we can have all kind of folds. That drawing was made for an article that I co-authored with Anita Ardon about COVID, where we did what we call a COVID multiple, where we saw how different medical disciplines each, just in a way I said in the earlier example, each orchestrate what COVID is in a different way. Is it a lung disease? Is it something in the lungs, or is it something in the population, or is it something in the transmission between bodies? Or so, and all these things lead to different ideas of how it could be tackled. So we put that out as an argument against the whole idea of holism and the idea that interdisciplinarity is a matter of integrating perspective of different scientists or integrating aspects of an object and of finding unified concepts that you can all agree on. My bottom line argument of today is it's not a good idea to try to agree. It's much more interesting to differentiate and to see how you disagree. And that was the little drawing there, is how COVID through the microscope, of COVID as an infection network, or COVID as a complaint, or COVID as the way it affects the economy, or COVID as cells, is each time different things. And if you look into the differences and different worlds that they come with, you can start to wonder of how to deal with those differences. As long as you try to agree, usually somebody wins. If you, or you get a sort of flawed compromise. If you analyze your disagreements, you have them to learn from. And what you can start to do is valuing and caring. Sounds sweet. Good. It's the way I summarize what I've been up to. The crucial in all this is that I'm not saying that facts are opinions or something like that. A fact is carefully crafted, and a good fact is properly crafted, and it's also always possible to relate to natural sciences or to any sciences whatsoever and to say, wait a minute, your fact isn't properly crafted. But I'm not saying that anatomists craft their facts wrongly, or anybody, or that the 2,000 kilocalories fact is false. There are lots of wrong and false facts around. But the facts I'm talking about here, the problem is not that they are just opinions. They're crafted and they are part of the world. So the whole thing is that knowledge is not about the world, it's part of the world. My knowledge is also part of the world. And it makes a big difference if I work together, or we as with a team with engineers, or if we work together with activists. That would be a different collaboration. It comes with different questions, etc., and so on. You can do both, but it's not the same. So the question then, once we have true facts, but there are different orchestrations, is not which one explains it all, but which reality do we want to live with here and now? The we being the most moot point, of course. What to orchestrate in which particular setting. And that's not an overall setting, it's always a specific setting. Drinking water in Amsterdam is a different problem than drinking water in the Po Valley or drinking water in Bangladesh. There are relations, but there are differences. So the question becomes how to best care for practices. And one of the things we're currently talking about is how to make it very clear that this valuing thing is not a matter of trade-off. It's not deciding, is this good or that good? Deciding could be something that you can do outside of the practice in a meeting room among politicians. Caring is getting things done. And that doesn't just depend on what you or I or whatever people in the meeting want most or like most. We all want a beautiful, clean, lovely world. Oh, well, apparently not all. Some people vote against that. But many of us may want that. But the question is how to realize things and how to get them done. So the point is not to decide, but to, let's call it tinker, to care. Thank you. So co-audience, this is how do you have to put that together, huh?
Yes. I can, if you want to take a breath, I can start with some reflections, perhaps. Think, given our presentations, it's not obvious how to put this together, but I think I at least know that these hang together and have a lot of commonalities. And let me perhaps start by highlighting these. I mean, we have definitely in common the questioning of binaries, relational ontologies.
No, I stop you there immediately.
Okay, but
no.
Let me complete and then you can stop me.
Okay, but I hope that I don't forget. Go ahead.
I will remind you. The importance of agency and to expand the agency from cigarette butts in our work with a drop of water. Perhaps where we may differ, but this is a question, is the key, what drives our research. How do we go about what drives our research? Because I think our research for both of us is driven by a desire to see how things can change, how things can evolve, or at least for me. Let me speak for my research. And for my research, I'm not particularly problematic or interested in whether something is a practice or a network or a thing. I'm happy to rely on 100 years of research from materialist social sciences that go before me and stand on these shoulders of that research. But I think what I'm trying to get at is, given that we are embedded in networks and we are part of practices, and I fully accept that, then what is it, what are the cracks in those practices that can make us resist what is happening, particularly what is happening with the current systematic disaster we call climate change, that is destroying the very conditions under which we have our metabolic exchanges with the biophysical world. And I think there might be, and it's a question, my hunch is there is a big similarity there in what drives your research. But maybe we diverge in our what we do with the observation. So so for me, the observation is kind of the beginning in order to come to an explanation. And although I believe it's important to give agency to different actors, like I work with a piece of paper called the mortgage, and I start with there, use it as a vehicle to bring out all these networks and relations around that. But I don't believe all actants and all agents have equal power within any set of networks. And maybe, for example, when in the work I do on...
Sorry, you say far too many things that I already want to relate to
stop.
all the time.
I'll stop. Yeah.
I don't believe agencies and power either. How to say that? Maybe, and that's also already one of the first differences. What you're trying to do in your type of theory building is set up an ontology in which you may have entities and about which you believe things. What I try to do is follow the way different scientific practices do this. So I don't believe in anything having agency. I wonder who gives agency to what, or how in a practice agency emerges or is distributed, or is something else than agency, how passivity is orchestrated, or how desire is, and that's each time something else. So it's, and the type of politics that my line of research is engaged with is, for a start, not one that I would want to fight with yours. I think you're really not the enemy, so we have.
No, indeed.
But it's a sort of more micro politics. It's each time on different levels. So it's not waiting until a big thing can happen, but it's each time opening the fracture lines in any practice. So there is not just one big fight going on. There is fractally, and every level of complexity you look, there are things to differentiate. And sometimes they are to combine. And let's say I just flagged up anatomy. Now, in a lot of medical practices, there is too much anatomy and not enough physiology, or too much physiology and not enough clinical thinking. So the way my type of research works is each time opening those fracture lines, and not one big one, but all these small ones. And thereby the audience is not big politics. The implied audience or the implied people to work with are far more professionals, or people within those practices who with the differentiation get more maneuver in either liking this one or that one, and we don't even say them what they should like. We open up the very fact that things that seem added up are intention. So it's a microwave, a way of doing micropolitics everywhere, always.
And yes, and this is actually very close to what I actually am not trying to build up ontologies.
No, but your nice example of the doing politics by Deborah's project of having more other species growing under a bridge. That's the kind of project that
but this is
that we could agree on.
No, indeed, and so I'm not.
Deborah, you have to bring peace.
And I'm not also interested in building up new ontologies, but I am interested in breaking down binaries that kind of cramp the way we think. And I think you and I are very, very similar in that. And it's very interesting to see the broader picture that we're brought together here, I think, because these two approaches are seen by some as some kind of having some kind of antagonism. I don't see any, actually.
Well, there's lots of them, of course, but it's not. But the question is how interesting they are and where they would become relevant.
Well,
let's say if we would have to do a research project together.
Okay, let's start with that. That's a good one.
Yeah,
so,
we would do things differently.
Yes,
but I would rather propose we each do our own. How to say this? I would rather propose we don't even fight about it. We don't agree.
There's no reason.
No. But it would be. Let's say it would be very different. But I think these things shouldn't be fused, but they can coexist.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let's. I think that's an interesting angle to take. So you work on water and I work on water. I have worked with water. Let us, for the benefit of the audience, see what we each do with water. So in one of my projects, I start with the example I brought in the talk, this drop of water that comes out of my tap. I start with that. What is this? Is it H2O? No, it's not, because H2O is a kind of chemical composition of what we call water. This is something that has been abstracted from sometimes hundreds of miles away, taken through pipe works, filters. It has been produced, it has been cleaned, it has been chlorinated, it has become dirty at some point again, then it has been cleaned again. I have to pay for it to get into my house. In other places of the world, people have to fight about. So by following this drop of water, I get to understand a whole world that is there. It's invisible. It's not problematized by urban dwellers, and it gives me a great knowledge about, in my case, because I'm also an urban scholar, how cities work. And it is I started this work drawn from a personal experience when I was living in Athens, and there were water shortages. So suddenly there was no water. And then you start, the crisis moment starts getting you to problematize all these networks that otherwise remain invisible. And then from that, you go into the cleanliness of water, which is governed by the EU Water Framework Directive, and I did work on the Water Framework Directive, again, trying to understand all these institutional, political frameworks that are. Maybe if you give your take on that, then we can, on how you study water.
I'll give you an example, not of what I'm doing now, but on work that Carolina Dominguez Guzman did when she was my PhD student, because that makes very clear the difference. Carolina was working on water in the Peruvian desert used for mango growing. Mango that are exported to the US or to Europe. And the point that what we then do, what she did, is not look at one drop of water in a network, but to look at two ways of handling that water. So one of the things that can be done, so there is a desert and you have to somehow have water to grow your trees. And one thing that became very popular is a highly modernized technique that is that of drip irrigation. And in drip irrigation, you have very thin lines that through which water goes to the trees, and the water has to be purified because otherwise the lines clog. And if you are a farmer, so she followed a farmer who did this, if that farmer has to first carefully clean the water and then add nutrients, calculated nutrients to the water, and that's one way of setting up a water infrastructure. Carolina compared this with the traditional way of watering mango trees with so-called podzas, which is a quite a large amount of water around the tree that the modernists say is not a good idea because there's evaporation, but that the farmers say, or the smallholders say, is a good idea because then water dissipates, the water that you don't use dissipates and replenishes the aquifers. And the farmers, the smallholders, say it's very weird to first clean the water because they get water from the Andes and it's rich and it's nourishing water. So they would never want to clean. So what we do is not following one drop all the way down, but look at these kind of complexities where one way of infrastructuring and the other way of infrastructuring are indeed in a sort of intention with each other, and to bring out, in this case, it was the relevant thing to do was to bring out that the pre-modern technique has a lot to go for it, to try to defend it against the modern technique, without saying that the modern technique is always in every way bad, because you could then, if you draw out what is good and bad about them, you can start to think about their advantage. So that would be sort of, that's the kind of take that I prefer, where you don't go out into the system, but you compare. Yeah. Contrasting as
but one doesn't preclude the other.
No, one doesn't preclude. You would love that article. It's online.
No, I know I will, and I do like your work a lot. But I think maybe one thing we should bring in the discussion is that anyone who may research scholarly articles on UP and your approach and your work, or your work and my work, finds this. I was laughing at them actually, because I was reading I started reading a couple just in light of this conversation. I had to stop because I think they were quite laughable. So they create these straw people of UP, what UP, urban political, and what, broadly speaking, actor network theory. And I know you're not, but you are portrayed as part of that, sure. And you are. And I was just laughing at it because it just doesn't capture any of the things I do or you do. But it is very characteristic, and I think that's maybe important to say, of the way academic publication the kind of economy of academic publications go these days.
We agree on that.
Yeah,
it's a total waste of people's time to compare theories. Do something. Relate to water or to cigarette butts or to birds, but not to theories in the abstract. Theories in the abstract is a really outdated idea. That's the 1960s. Most of you.
Well, it was
born in
it was a time. Yeah, the 1960s was a time when there was belief that these theories in the abstract are going to change the world. We know much better now, and we are all engaged. Even those who do grounded theory, and I do that, but it's always grounded. So it's always the observation of empirical research that leads to some kind of theoretical insights that may explain broader processes. Eustace is trying to tell us something.
Yeah, Eustace wants the audience to give a chance
to give a chance to the audience, right?
That would be nice.
Yeah.
Because now we'll start to be too smug. We agree too much. So the audience can.
I was listening with great interest, and I know many other people were too. But you insisted that you wanted to involve the audience, so that's what we'll do. Yeah. Who would like to ask a question?
These chairs, by the way, if we took Materialities, they're far too lazy. Yeah. So they give me. So you want to relax, and then if you want to think, you have to sit like this,
please be concise.
Hurt yourself at the end. Because they want us to debate, so we can't be too relaxed.
No, we can't be too relaxed.
You guys are getting very comfortable, I see. So really quickly. Listening to the UP projects and the theories, it seems like there's a lot which is about embedded in power relations. Whereas when we talk about praxeology, on the other hand, praxeography, sorry. And there's been a lot of criticism that by following practices that we basically undermine a lot of these power structures, very big power structures. How do you kind of bring these two debates?
What do you mean by undermine, Shannon?
In the undermining, like, so for example, if I take your example of like, what is water, clean water here in Amsterdam versus, let's say, clean water in Dhaka City, both of them are delta countries. And how do you basically, how does water become clean in these two places? Massive power structural differences, as well as a lot of like these colonialism and its afterlives that are also attached to it. So if we're looking at just water practices in different places, we kind of undermine those structural power imbalances.
You mean undermine or deny, or what do you mean?
I think both, and I think that has been the critique of it. So how do you sort of like, how would you respond to something like that? Thank you.
You can study power structures as it's an object like anything else. I don't want to presume them. That would be like presuming gravitation. And is gravitation, there's always gravitation everywhere. Is gravitation relevant to the current project? So it would be interesting to see if you, how to say this, if you see the water in Dhaka, what I would find interesting to follow is how clothing, this happened to be something I know a bit about thanks to Hassan Afshar, our guest, how clothing factories are sort of demanded to dirty the water by the impositions of the way that companies want to buy stuff from them. So then I see power, but I would never claim power. I would want to see it, so to speak, or smell it or follow it, and not have it as a sort of explanatory thing that you can draw out and you can call power 5 times and it always works. But it's a practical object like anything else. What does it consist of? Which power? When is it monetary power? When is it violence? When is it verbal power? So there's so many kinds of power. So make it empirical. Does that? And that is also why this praxeology. And by the way, the interesting thing is you think it's praxeology, that's fine. But the reason it's praxeography, it's not a general knowledge, it's really a methodological practice of opening it up. Of graphy is writing, so it's opening it up. Yeah.
And if I may also add in UB, at least for my work, because again, it's a very large field, and I cannot claim, let's talk about my work, and also the people who represent UB in the book, perhaps. Power is not this kind of big thing out there that's a structure and that governs things. It is something, again, to be empirically observed and related to. But when I'm interested in what makes actants act in a specific way, and that often leads to power relations and social relations.
But that is interesting. That may be helpful for people as a difference, but you're interested in what makes actors act. I'm interested in how. So never in why questions, but always in how questions. Yeah. And that's exactly the shift from this layered science where explanation is what you do to analytic science where opening up is what you do. Yeah. So, and this is a good recognizing point. Do you ask why questions and how questions? And I'm not saying that one should never ask why questions, but that's a salient difference in research tactics.
Yeah, so but how do you, is the why something you're interested in the research? So how do you go from the how, from the description, the observation, into the explanation?
I don't.
Yeah, so what does that do for social sciences? If you're not interested in explanation, where does that place the role of social sciences in this particular conjuncture, where it is, I think we do live in times that...
I find that.
So...
No, I think one of the strengths of the how question, it's a very different strength. Yeah. So and indeed,
I'm not saying it's not important. No. It's
super
important.
And in lots of journals you don't get published, then you publish another journal. But I think the relevance of the how question is indeed that the thing is not to go from one element to its source, but to contrast and to see the different practices and their different strengths and different effects. So it's more into, it's not in the origin, the explanation, but in the effect. So I'm more interested in the future than the past. No, that's sneaky. No, but it's a different type of analyzing the world, and how you do that, what that does to the social sciences. I'm not very concerned that the social sciences will all go and do this, but I think it's a very relevant way of doing social science, to ask how questions.
I'm not saying it's not relevant, not at all. I'm just saying that, well, at least I see a certain responsibility, if you wish, to also go into the why question, and to go into
responsibility
the prefigurative. Sorry?
Why? What do you gain from that?
I don't gain anything from that.
No,
I feel,
but
personally, I don't.
No.
But I am an academic, and I'm in a privileged position. I'm funded by public money.
But what does the public gain from you answering the why question?
The public in general doesn't gain anything in particular, but the communities with which I engage with my research find the way we work together and asking the why questions, and find it transformative.
I give you another example.
And I'm sure, wait, because I'm trying to get you to also say, I'm sure the communities and people you work with find the same.
Exactly.
Yes. So that's what I'm trying to get you to say. Although you do say, "Oh, it's irrelevant," I don't think it is.
No.
So
I give you a very nice example.
I'm sorry. I'm going to have to warn you. So this will be your closing statement.
Oh, right. Okay. I got very fast. Sorry.
And then we can continue the conversation over drinks.
Yeah.
I first want to answer that and then give a closing statement. What I would like to that is a nice small anecdote, not a big thing. Very early on, when we were working together with the engineers, the water engineers were talking about the people at the tap, at your tap, as their clients. So these were they're actually in Dutch the klanten, so it's more between client and customer. So they were highlighting the relation, the financial relation, but they also had the problem that people throw all kind of problematic things in the toilet. And I said to them, as long as you call them customer, they can do whatever they want. Why don't you call them user? Then you can ask them to take care of your technology. They love that contribution. That's not an answer to a why question. That is really tinkering with how you orchestrate something. Good. Now my final remark, Justus. It's okay. I wish you all good luck with your research.
Final remark?
Yes, though I don't have any particular final. I just I think the identifying problems and exploring possibilities for change. I do see that as a responsibility of the scholar, not only of social sciences, of any scientist, because as Anna Tsing said, if we pretend we are neutral, political economy is going to seep into our observations and descriptions anyway, because this is the social imaginary within which we live, as Castoriadis says, and we can't get out of it.
How questions is not pretending to be neutral.
Sorry?
Asking how questions is not pretending to be...
I'm not talking about you now.
Okay.
In general, I say my position is...
Okay.
I'm talking about my position.
Fine.
It wasn't a comment
Sorry.
on your contribution.
Yeah.
So that's what I see as my contribution and position.
Thank you so much for an animated debate.